Tuesday night ahead of game one of the Eastern Conference Finals between the Celtics and the Heat in Miami. There is nowhere, folks, that I would rather be. Welcome to the Slate across your DraftKings channels. Of course, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube is where much of the audience finds us. Adam Kaufman, Shirag Hira, Matt Meiselman, just a whole bunch of people that for one reason or another, very invested, both literally and figuratively, in the outcome of not only tonight's game, but this series. Guys, I have no bias whatsoever in what happens tonight. None at all. Yeah, huge Celtics fan, as the people probably know who have been watching. How excited are we for the Final
Four? Flash the people right now?
What's that?
Did you just mail flash the people right now?
I mail flash them with the front of my T-shirt. Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody gave me any beads, Shirag. So so you're not getting the rest. You got to pay extra for that. How excited are we for the Final Four, Mr. Hira?
Super excited. I mean, Matt thinks the Warriors are completely overrated. I think they've been the most complete team outside of the time that Steph Curry got hurt. Sure, the Celtics definitely are the best team right now, but that upside, that championship medal, I'm a little bit worried for what can happen with Golden State. But I mean, these are just amazing teams. To think that the Dallas Mavericks made this trade at the middle of the year and said, you know what, we wanted Kristaps Porzingis, we wanted to get these two guys together, and nope, we're gonna trade them away for Bertans and Dinwiddie. And Dinwiddie has the game of his life in Game 7, and you're like, well, that trade paid off. But it's not only that, that opened up the different rotations with their big men. Sure, their big men are undersized, but they play above their head from three, and they try to rebound really hard, and they gang rebound as a team. So there's just a lot to love. Miami, the number one seed, actually holding the number one seed after everyone was like, well, Miami just got the number one seed because nobody was trying hard enough, because they were avoiding Brooklyn, whatever that hype was. But it's just crazy to see how these things have panned out, and just the way that the Celtics turning their season around to get to this point, absolutely remarkable with the rookie coach. That's not to be discounted, because you don't know. There was uncertainty going into this year with the Celtics because they just shook everything up. Danny Ainge went to the Jazz, and now you have Brad Stevens in the front office, and he brings in a brand new rookie coach that nobody knew about. There was some definite uncertainty going into here, and to see how all these teams played out, it's really cool to see.
There are a lot of fun narratives surrounding the Celtics going back to the start of the year, and we'll get to all that. But Matt, what about your thoughts on these Final Four? And I agree with Shirag. It's remarkable that the Dallas is even part of this conversation, and not even the fact that the Mavericks and Luka are here, but the team they knocked off on the way to get here. The Phoenix Suns, just a complete no-show at home in Game 7.
Yeah, well, Shirag just did a good job teeing up both series. So I've got a lot to say about everything, basically. So you let me know, where do we want to start? Do we want to start with Boston, Miami, or we want to start with tomorrow's game and work backwards? Because I kind of just want to jump into wherever we're going to go.
Yeah, we'll squeeze in tomorrow at the end, assuming we have time. But I think most of the people, when it comes to obviously DFS and making their showdown lineups or two-day classic lineups, most especially the betting market and how to approach this series, it's all about the East in Game 1 tonight, tipping off, by the way, at 8:45 in South Beach, which is absolutely brutal. We got a late night ahead of us, folks. But yes, Matt, start us off with the East.
Okay, so we don't know yet if Marcus Smart is playing tonight. That's the starting point. And I think I was leaning towards him being doubtful until about 10 minutes ago, and then we got that he'd be a game time decision. Yep. I think that's probably an upgrade, and now it's really 50-50, right? They're not being very cautious with him. It's just, can he play through the pain? And if so, he'll be out there, and if not, and they think he can hurt it worse, he won't. But it does seem like he's really going to try to warm up and give it a go. So I have no idea if he plays tonight or not, but I do think that's a pretty big deal, even with Robert Williams back. I know we talked about Smart not mattering that much last round for the game that he missed in that round. And I still think that the same sort of thing is true, but it wasn't that we said he didn't matter. It was that he was only worth a point or two to the spread. And that does matter to some extent. It's just, I think people overreacted in the first round to it, and maybe they're not reacting as much because the Celtics actually did pretty well with him. That was one of their two blowout wins that they had in the game he didn't play. So all of that is to say, I think Smart does matter. They can certainly win without him, but it would be good if he's out there. And then as far as the series, I mean, I think the Celtics have a huge advantage over the Heat. A lot has been made of the fact that the Heat have done better in games that Kyle Lowry has missed in the playoffs. But I mean, we know that Lowry is playing through an injury, but it kind of misses the fact that Miami with a healthy Kyle Lowry is a better team than the injured Kyle Lowry or no Kyle Lowry. Like we don't have the option of getting the healthy version of Lowry in this series. It doesn't seem like, which I think adds up to make the Celtics just a lot better than the Heat are. The Heat did get the 1 seed, but obviously the Celtics had a slow start to the year. It took them a while to get going. They were under 500 for 35, 40 games. So I do think it's a big deal that Lowry is going to be either playing hurt or not playing at all for the majority of the series, I think. So the Celtics have a pretty big advantage. I don't feel great about game 1. So I love them for the series, but the rest advantage that the Heat have, and maybe that's the thing we can talk about more specifically for tonight, I think it makes sense that Miami's favored tonight. Not sure if it should be 2.5 necessarily, unless Smart doesn't play, but overall, I think it's fair that the Heat are slight favorites tonight. I think the Celtics should be even bigger favorites than they are for the series, though.
Well, so to your point, and the DraftKings Sportsbook reflects this, the Heat, as Matt said, are 2.5-point favorites as things stand right now in game 1, but the Celtics are favored to come out of the East over the course of a series. That's more or less how I see it. Like if either team, whoever wins tonight, it's not going to shock me by any means, especially if Marcus Smart does not play or he's not even close to 100% or whatever it is. We still didn't even know. You mentioned Rob Williams. We don't know exactly what his role is even going to be. Like technically, you could look at this in a bunch of different ways. Like for one, he wasn't on the injury report, so he's completely available. Ime Udoka, Celtics head coach, said no restrictions. So I feel like we're just sort of left to assume he's going to be thrust back into the starting rotation. But at the same time, Grant Williams coming off, obviously, the game of his life in game 7, so he would be moving back to the bench unless, of course, well, I got to think, even if Smart doesn't play, Derek White starts, so it wouldn't be Grant anyway. So, does Grant go back to the bench? Does Rob Williams start? Williams was technically available for game 7. They opted not to play him, but he was in uniform sitting on the bench the whole time. He hasn't played 4 straight games, hasn't played in 10 days, so we don't really know what this is going to look like until we get, obviously, closer to tip time, closer to lock, however you want to frame it. And I just think that the matchup, and this is, a deeper dive and we can get into all this, but the way these teams match up in general, it's so different than how the Celtics matched up with Milwaukee or how how the Heat matched up with the Sixers, obviously. So it's, I don't know, where do you start, I guess, here, Shirag, when you're considering different betting options that are available to you?
I'm looking honestly at the way that these futures, and you have to look at the Heat to win game 1 plus the Celtics to win the series. That's my way of starting for this series, at least. I want to start there because I think that is probably the outcome that is most likely going to happen, and getting that now definitely sets it up well, and it gives you an opportunity to add to the bet. If they win game 1, the line is going to move towards the Heat, giving you a little bit better odds on the Celtics to win the series. Sure, it's kind of priced in, but I still believe if the Celtics win tonight, the line is still going to move towards them for the series a little bit. It's not going to be, I think we were sitting at minus 180 for the series.
I'll double check for you. I know at one point
Game X series double right now. If Miami to win game 1 and Boston to win the series is plus 230. But if you just take the series winner, minus 175.
Yeah.
So this minus 175 is going to move in the direction, potentially maybe minus 150 or minus 130 after game 1. But I think the best plus odds are if you go game X series double, you scroll over a little bit.
Sure.
Right there. No, the bottom one where you got it.
The next row for scrolling.
Yep.
There we go.
So I think the best bet for this game, at least, is for me to say Miami to win game 1, Boston to win the series, plus 230 gives you the best odds.
Matt, you in line with that?
I don't know. I'm just kind of trying to do the math in my head here because I like the idea of it in theory. I just don't know that the number is quite good enough.
Okay.
Like, if Miami wins this game, what is Boston's probability to win the series then? maybe we're looking at about 50-50. So you've got like a 60% chance of the Heat winning tonight. If Smart's out, I think that that's probably pretty reasonable. And then we kind of have to assume Smart comes back for game 2, right? In that scenario,
I would.
A little more desperation.
Yeah.
Like, I think this is a reasonable bet. I also think Heat to win game 1 and Heat to win series is reasonable also. Like, I actually think that this particular section of the betting markets has not been adjusted for the fact that the Miami line has gone up throughout the day. So I think these are roughly fair lines. I think if you're going to bet Miami tonight, I think you do want to pair it with one of these where you include the series also, because at this point, I don't really think there's much value left on Miami's game line for tonight, but I could understand going for either of those. But what I will say, though, on this subject of like where the series goes after this game, if Boston wins tonight, I think we see a massive correction to the series line. So Chirag's point was, if Miami wins tonight, Boston might even still be favored in the series.
Yep.
I'm not sure that that's true, but it won't move a ton, right? Like, we could see the Celtics drop from -175 to -115. Like, we'll see a correction, but Boston might even still be favored, or if they're underdogs at that point, maybe it's like +110,
Or both
+115.
teams will be -110, -115.
Yeah, so it'll be around even, I think, if Boston loses. If Boston wins tonight, though, I think we see a series line north of 400 going into game 2, because the Celtics are a much better team. I think the odds makers know that. And the only reason that Miami is favored at all for tonight, even if Smart we knew was out, but Miami didn't have this rest advantage, I think the Celtics would be favored in the game. I think the rest advantage is so heavily priced in right now because the Heat have had, 5 days off, and the Celtics
Pretty much,
have had
yeah.
1 day off since a game 7.
And
And they're
travel.
traveling from Boston down to Miami. Like, the Heat have just been waiting there for them. I think that they're getting like an additional 3 points of home court advantage compared to what they'll get in game 2. So if Boston manages to pull this one off, like they're massively in the driver's seat for the series at that point. So if you like the Celtics to win this game, I think like you could even make the argument Celtics game 1 and Celtics series. We're kind of just laying out all the options here. Like, ultimately, I think most of these markets are pretty fair. I think they're priced pretty much correctly. If Smart's in, like, if Smart's out, then I think you attack something like what Chirag's saying, where Heat win game 1, Celtics win the series. I think that bet makes the most sense if we get Smart not playing tonight, but we still don't know that yet.
Well, I mean, what these numbers tell you is just, really it attempts to reflect the numbers of just how heavily the Celtics are thought of and are favored to win the series, because, if, as Chirag brought up, and I think it's a good idea, and I agree with what Matt's saying about the number not necessarily being big enough as well. The Heat to win game 1, Celtics to win the series +230 is one thing. For the fact that to jump basically 4 times for the Celtics to win game 1 and the Heat to win the series at +800 obviously speaks to the Heat don't have a lot of believers out there. There's a lot of faith in the Celtics to go out and win this series. It's clearly where the money has gone to this point. I think a lot of people have been impressed by what Boston has done, whether it's sweeping Brooklyn and KD and Kyrie out of the playoffs, or obviously coming back from 3-2 against the defending champs, albeit without Middleton, but, knocking down Giannis, who had been so good and in that series, especially in the latter half of that series, and the rise of Tatum and, the role players contributing and that stellar defense throughout, on and on and on. Going up against a Heat team, they took 2 of 3 during the regular season, a team that's, not dominant. And I don't want to discount Miami. Like, there's no question that, the Celtics faced an elite scorer in Kevin Durant in series 1, the best player in the world in Giannis in series 2. And here in this series, it's the most complete team of the 3 that they've had to face so far. Definitely the team that has the best defense on the other side, as compared anyway to the Nets and to the Bucks, and very much on that same page with the Celtics defensively. It's just a question of, how physical the Heat are going to be, how headstrong, how tough, how well coached. That's one thing. People forget, not people around Boston, maybe people nationally forget that these two teams matched up in the East Finals in the bubble just 2 years ago. And it was largely the same rosters. There have been changes, obviously, but largely the same rosters on both sides. But that Heat team, Spoelstra far and away outcoached Brad Stevens. They were more physical. They were just, they were better. They were tougher. They didn't kowtow. The Celtics are coming into this one, I think, in their minds with a lot to prove.
Yeah, I think so. Although, I mean, really, this comes down to it's not as much for me about that as it is for the quality of the Heat just not being what people think it is. Like Lowry not being himself or just not playing at all is a big deal. And I genuinely think that this is the easiest series that the Celtics have had so far in this year's playoffs. I think the Nets were a better team than this Heat team is. And we know that even though the Celtics
That's a spicy take.
That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for. I think that even though the Celtics beat the Nets in 4 games, like those games were close. Like those were not convincing.
It was like 16 points aggregate for the series.
Right, right. So it's easy to look back on that and say that was an easy sweep. It was not an easy sweep. That was about as heavily contested as a sweep can get. I think they knocked off a pretty good Nets team that they were better than, but nonetheless, it was a good Nets team. And they obviously just beat a really good Bucks team. I don't think the Heat are as good as either of those. And that's reflected in the betting line too. Like Boston's almost as large of a favorite for this series as they were last series. And that's without home court advantage, which they had in their first 2 rounds. The Celtics were smaller favorites against the Nets than they are against Miami. They were barely favored in the Brooklyn series. So I think the odds makers actually do agree that Miami is worse than Milwaukee and Brooklyn. It's really like, I don't quite understand, and I guess we'll get into this with the Warriors. I don't quite understand why people love Miami so much. They played a very, very injured Atlanta team. And yes, Butler missed a couple games, but Trae Young wasn't himself. John Collins basically didn't play. Clint Capella basically didn't play. And then in the second round, I mean, Embiid missed 2 games. And then when he did come back, it wasn't quite the same Embiid we're used to seeing. And James Harden has clearly fallen off towards the end of the year. Like this has not been that hard of a road for the Heat to get to this point. And
it kind of reminds me of like the Hawks and their little conference finals run last year, whereas they beat the Knicks and then
aren't those guys cute?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird to say that kind of thing about a number 1 seed, but I think it's true. And I think it's even more true of Golden State. So we can hop over to that series anytime, but I think the Celtics are a much, much better team. My concerns for game 1 tonight, it's Smart, and it's the fact that they're playing on so much shorter rest than Miami is. Otherwise, I think that this is a hugely lopsided matchup between these 2 teams.
I have a question for you. Is there any value in then potentially taking the Celtics, taking the Heat in the first half or first quarter or anything like that to say, or does it make sense more like, hey, this team is the team that's already been playing and one team is just coming out of practice. They might start a little bit slow. I'm trying to see if there's another angle that we can attack here, because is there anything to do with the benefit of that rest?
I mean, well, for full transparency, it's very hard for me to justify adding money on the Celtics because I already have been betting the Celtics to win the conference for like months now.
Yeah, so, going back to January.
So for me, like, there's not really much, like something crazy like Jimmy Butler would have to get COVID. Like for me to put more on the Celtics, it has more to do with risk tolerance for me. But having said that, if Smart is in tonight, I think plus 120 is a really good value. I think the Celtics have a 50-50 shot to win this game if Smart's on the court, even if he's compromised to some extent. So the value, I think, is just betting the Celtics if Smart plays. And if he doesn't play, then I think that this current line is just where it should be, and I don't see any value. Like, I think this line is perfectly appropriate for the scenario where Marcus Smart is not available tonight. And in that case, like, I'm just not doing anything. I'll just watch it and hope the Celtics win. But before we jump to the other one, I feel like we should touch on this idea of hedging a little bit. Since
I mean, there's still a couple of things I want to do with this series too before we go to the other one also. But
okay, so just quickly on the idea of hedging, and I guess this is the one where it's relevant for me, but I feel like what people are doing when they hedge, for the most part, like 99% of cases, is they're doing it for their own psychology. They're like, I have so much on the line on this one team.
Yeah.
Let me just throw some on the other team so I don't feel so bad if it doesn't work out.
Well, it's what Mattress Mac does every year with his furniture giveaway.
Sure. And like, but the reason it makes sense for him is because he's betting so much money initially that he can't afford to. I don't know what his finances are, but you can you can imagine that it would be tough for him to stomach losing millions of dollars on something. So he'll hedge it so that he doesn't have to worry about that. It's the same reason why anyone takes insurance on anything. It hurts psychologically, it could affect your life if you lose the big bet. But if you're betting routinely and you don't have that much at stake, like it's not life-changing amount of money, if you're, just in a regular standard betting paradigm, the only reason to hedge then is because the opportunity on the other side presents itself as good value. Like, you don't need to hedge a bet that's small enough that it doesn't affect you that much anyway. You would want to hedge if the other team now makes sense. And now you've got a plus EV bet initially, and then you get another plus EV bet to pair with it because it's just more plus EV bets. Like, over time, that's what you're looking for. So if Miami were 4-1 to win this series right now, I would be talking about how undervalued the Heat are and how great of a bet that is, because that would just be a really good number for the given probability. It's not the case, however. I think the Celtics are still undervalued, but what you really want to do when you're deciding whether or not to hedge is look at what the actual odds are right now and determine, would I make this bet at these odds if I had no prior investment? Like, just totally independent, clean slate. Would I bet Miami in this series? My answer is absolutely not. But maybe for you, it's different. Everyone doesn't quantify things the exact same way. There are different metrics, different rating systems, so on and so forth. For me, though, I don't think the Heat are a good bet, so I'm not going to take them. Now, if we found out, let's say, like, God forbid, I mean, I'm not superstitious, but like, I can like hold my breath a little for this. Like, if someone on the Celtics got hurt, Tatum, COVID, whatever, just throw out those words, nervously talk about them a little bit. Like, if the information
I'd rather you
changes, I'll cut it off there. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. But if the information,
but like to your point, obviously, yeah, if an opportunity presents itself the other
Right.
way, but like to your point, based on what we know right now, I think what you're saying is, if you just don't believe in Miami, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to hedge the other way. If anything, it might make sense for you to say, all right, I'm that big a believer on both Boston and Golden State advancing, and then we've got ourselves a series, and I don't know which way that's going to go. Almost hedging right now, not even waiting for the finals, hedging right now, putting a little money on Golden State to win the championship.
That's not the way I'm doing that one, because I don't believe in Golden State. But to your point,
but obviously the betting market does.
Sure, but to your point, like, my hedge that I'm making right now is betting Dallas to win the championship. It's the same concept. I just am picking the other team. So I totally agree with the premise. Just I'm doing it with the different team.
Right. The other stuff that I wanted to talk about with this series, Shrog, CEH, our buddy in the chat, asks, how do we feel about the 203 over-under, 203.5 right now over-under in this game tonight, when, again, we're talking about two elite defenses?
I mean, I'm leaning towards the under. I was watching that game, Bucks and Celtics, and thinking that same thing. Like, that was a grinded out slugfest. Sure, Grant Williams went off and hit, 7 threes, 8 threes?
Yeah, 7 of 18.
Yeah.
In a game 7.
And if you take that number out of the total, like, that was a very, 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 very low scoring game. And it's not that people were tight or they were just shots missed or whatever, open shots. Sure, Derek White missed a lot of open shots and he was given to him. But outside of that, it wasn't like there was just like a brick fest. It was just straight up defense, good coverage. And I think that's what's going to continue here. And I'm going to have to lean towards the under for sure. But it's a low number. So what you're setting up for is, with this close spread, you have a chance for overtime. You have a chance for anything fluky happening, free throws. So there, with the low number where teams are already averaging higher than these points, it makes it a little bit difficult.
So the other thing, we were talking about the matchup before, and I want to hear from obviously both you guys. When obviously we're all watching the playoffs very closely, and strengths of teams and whatnot, and it's not just Boston, Miami are very good defensively, elite defensively. They're also, they were tied for first in the regular season at opponent 3-point percentage. These are two teams that guard and defend the three very, very well, which obviously if Marcus Smart is unavailable tonight, that's a huge opportunity for the Heat. The one thing that really over the course of this series, and I don't necessarily believe it will happen, but the thing that would worry me as a Celtics fan, as a Celtics bettor, whatever, is what we saw in the bubble a couple of years back, when admittedly the Celtics were not as strong and maybe the Heat were stronger, but the Heat just getting hot from three. Like the Nets weren't going to get hot from three. The Bucks weren't going to get hot from three. But you got Tyler Hero, who has had really a pretty bad playoff compared to obviously what he did in the regular season. But you got him, you got, Duncan Robinson if he sees the floor again. You got Max Strus, obviously, who's had some, really good moments against his former organization so far this season and in general. Obviously Kyle Lowry, Victor Oladipo, like they have guys that have the ability to torch you. Now, I don't know if it's going to happen, if it's going to be all, NBA Jam out there, but they have the ability, and it's going to come down to how well. I don't think they're going to get opportunities left and right. Again, the Celtics defend the line very, very well. It's not going to be like all the free opportunities when the Celtics were playing the Bucks, except on the other side. And I don't think we'll see that in this series for the Celtics as well. They'll get a lot of 3-point chances, but they're going to be contested looks. That's what would worry me. I don't know if that, gives either of you any concern.
Well, the thing I'm concerned about just quickly is I'm like, my heart's racing just with Chirag mentioning overtime. Like already we're going to start with, I don't even want to think about that as an option.
It's the range of outcomes for sure. When
it's definitely a thing. It's a close spread. Yeah, it definitely could happen. I just wasn't really processing that as a possibility, but oh man, we haven't had one of those yet. We did have that Tatum buzzer beater game 1 of the first round, but like, yeah, that would just be another level of stress. But anyway, as far as the matchup, well, one quick thing to go back to, I do think Grant Williams starts either way. Like, I think Robert Williams plays. I know Kaufman's a little more of a Celtics insider than me. I've only been a fan for like 4 or 5 months, but I do think Grant Williams, just given how well he played in Game 7, probably 6 in the starting lineup with Robert Williams coming off the bench. Yeah. And then if Smart's out, White just replaces Smart. But I feel really good about the matchup. I agree with all the points about the Celtics being able to defend Miami's shooters. I like it even more on the other side, though, because I think what Miami is uniquely good at defensively is taking away a team that is kind of just running through one player. We saw it with Trae Young, like they'll routinely double the other team's primary guard and try to make them give up the ball. Against Trae Young, that makes perfect sense because the Hawks' other scorers are not at that level. And then we saw it when Embiid didn't play. They just negated James Harden's impact entirely. Like he was basically not there, even though like you would think with Embiid out, Harden would be able to score more. That was just not the case because I think the Heat do a really good job of defending opposing primary guards. But with Boston, like everyone does everything. Mm-hmm. You can't do that against the Celtics. I know Tatum is like the lead guy, but the Celtics have 4 or 5 really good offensive players. Like you're just not, if you double Tatum, like how many points is Jaylen Brown going to score? So I don't really think that it's going to work the same against Boston. I think the Celtics are really well-rounded and they're kind of set up well to combat a team that will focus a lot on like doubles and traps with the other team's top star players.
Do we agree that Jason Tatum is the best player in this series?
I think it's close. I think it's really close between Tatum and Butler, but I think the guy that's probably the most overvalued in this series is Bam. I just don't think Bam has much of an offensive game. And he got his stats a little bit inflated with DeAndre Jordan trying to guard him for 2 whole games. I don't think he's a great offensive player. Of course, his defense is good, but like I'd take Horford over Bam for a playoff series. I think all 3 of us would probably agree with that right now, just given how well Horford's playing. But yeah, to me, Butler and Tatum's pretty close.
I just feel like Horford's 3-point shot, just that consistency. It doesn't even matter if he's been playing well or not. Since his career in Atlanta, he's been a knockdown 3-point shooter from the big. Like he's one of the catalysts for the movement in the league for big men shooting threes. Mm-hmm.
And just think about what could happen if he gets to pull Bam away from the basket. Like the other 2 teams that the Heat just played, Embiid had a ligament injury in his thumb and couldn't shoot. He basically didn't make any threes the whole series. And the series before that, you were looking at like a Okongwu and Capella and an injured Collins playing center. There's no 3-point shooting there either. Bam basically can just stay under the rim. But if the Celtics are going to play Horford at center, like who guards Horford then? Because the whole team can shoot threes. I mean, I don't need an extra reason to like the Celtics, but I do think they match up really well with Miami.
Matt's been talking a big game about not putting more money on the Celtics, but by the time this show ends, first thing he's going to do before that series begins, quick little extra investment. The DraftKings Sportsbook, by the way, guys, has Jason Tatum as -120 to win the first ever Larry Bird trophy as Eastern Conference Final MVP. And then Jimmy Butler's plus 200. Part of the reason I asked the question. Jaylen Brown plus 900. Bam Adebayo plus 1,200. I don't know if you would be inclined to go with one of those top tier guys, or do you like, an Al Horford at plus 3,500, somebody with longer odds to potentially win that trophy? Tyler Hero plus 4,000.
Yeah, I like Horford. I mean, my favorite bet for Finals MVP right now is Luka. So I don't know if we want to go over to that, but I don't think there's any value on Curry or Tatum right now. I think the Celtics are too well rounded to go after Tatum, and I don't think the Warriors' chances to win it all are good enough to bet Curry.
Well, as far as we don't need to spend time on Finals MVP because obviously I don't know that people are necessarily interested in putting money on that when it's still in the Final Four. But yes, thoughts on.
But this is the best time to do it. Honestly,
well, then shout out. Who do you like?
I mean, it has to be Luka Doncic as your value play. Like when I was talking with Matt, like the difference between taking a bet because there's value on it and taking a bet because you think it's going to win or lose, it's such a different mind frame. And the Warriors beat the Mavs. Sure, they're the favorites. But if the Mavs win this, you're not going to get better odds on Luka Doncic than plus 550 if they end up winning game 2, take a series lead. Then the odds are going to start shifting in the way of the Mavs. So this is the best opportunity. You get the longest odds right now, and you don't have to put as much. Let's say the Mavs start taking a lead in the series. Luka Doncic can potentially jump ahead of Steph Curry and be plus 180, plus 130, or whatever in this number, and that just loses all the value. Then you're like, oh, then you're chasing. You're like, well, maybe I should have, and now it looks like it could happen. So that's just kind of what I've tried to learn from betting and value and understanding that perspective. And the best option there is Luka Doncic.
Got less than 10 minutes left in this show. Let's talk about the Warriors and Mavericks some. I know a lot of people are stunned that Dallas is there in the first place. Should be a lot of fun, obviously. The Warriors, I don't think Matt is on an island thinking that there's maybe a little too much hype surrounding that team just because of the championship pedigree. So, Matt, what's the outlook that has you favoring Dallas here?
So first, to Sharag's point, it's not that I'm basing anything on who I think is going to win or what I think is going to happen. I don't think anything. It's just probabilities. Like it's just how likely is the thing, and then are the odds good enough for that likelihood? So that's all I'm doing always, ideally. 99% of the time, that's what I'm trying to do anyway. But as far as why I like Dallas in this series, and I'm not that excited about Luka for Finals MVP because I think the Celtics are going to win, but I do think that the Mavericks should at worst be pick 'em against the Warriors. And I actually lean towards them winning the series just outright. So the odds for the series are like, almost plus 200. It's crazy to me that those are the odds, but I do understand why. It's a couple things, really. The Warriors have the names and the pedigree and the experience and the coaching, and they've been there before and all of that. And then the Mavericks don't have any of those things. Then there's also the fact that Gary Payton II is still injured, and no one for the whole season has seemed to care about him. But I think he's the third best player on this team behind Curry and Draymond Green. And he's specifically important in a series against a player like Luka, where he's the only guy the Warriors have that can guard him with any regularity one-on-one. I mean, no one can really guard Luka one-on-one, but Payton is the guy who by far has the best shot to do it. And he also just fits in so well with this team where, like, you don't need to have Curry, Wiggins, Poole. I know everyone loves that lineup with all four of them, with Curry, Wiggins, Poole, and Clay on the court together. That's just diminishing returns on your scoring ability. Like, you don't need all four of those guys in the game. The Warriors' best lineup has Draymond, Payton, or Iggy, who's also hurt. I think one of those two. And then you have, I guess, Curry, Wiggins, and I'd put Poole over Clay. I think Poole's better than Klay Thompson, but whatever. You take Clay over Poole, it's pretty close. So I think not having Payton and Iguodala, they need at least one of those guys to have a real defender out there. I think that's a really big deal. But then we also look at who the Warriors have beaten in the playoffs compared to who the Mavericks have beaten in the playoffs. And Denver, I'm not even sure, is like, they were barely a playoff caliber team without MPJ and without Murray. And then the Warriors beat a Grizzlies team with half a series of no Steven Adams. And then John Morant, I honestly think if Morant doesn't get injured, the Grizzlies win that round. Like, there were close games that could have gone either way. And then if Morant's out there instead of Dylan Brooks in game 6, like we could have seen something, or sorry, game 4 when it was 2-1. I think we could have seen a lot different of a fourth quarter. That was the one where the Grizzlies blew the big lead and Golden State pulled ahead 3-1. Like Morant's out there for that fourth quarter, that could be 2-2 going to Memphis, and then Memphis won game 5 by how many points? Like they could have been up in the series. And that's not to mention like Morant could have hit the game winner in game 1. A lot could have happened if Morant was healthy. So I don't think the Warriors have beaten good teams. And the Mavericks beat Utah, who I certainly am higher on than most people. So I'll just kind of leave that there. But they beat the Suns, who I think we all would agree were the best team in the Western Conference. And like game 7, they didn't just beat them. They destroyed them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the strength of schedule for Dallas far exceeds the strength of schedule for Golden State. And it, for some reason, the public just doesn't care. So I legitimately think the Mavericks are a better team, at least until Gary Payton returns, Andre Iguodala returns, which doesn't seem very likely. But I think Dallas is actually better than Golden State as the rosters currently stand.
What do you say, Shrug?
It's tough. It's extremely, extremely tough to make that kind of statement just because of Draymond Green. That's the only different factor, because you have the superstar players that can go off for 50 or drop the dimes or hit threes or whatever you need, carry a team to the finish line on both sides. But that key piece that really separates these two teams is what Draymond Green can do. And I don't think you can say Maxi Kleber is in the same range of.
No, Shrug, you're not going to catch me comparing anyone on Dallas to Draymond. It's more, I think Luka is significantly above Curry, and that gap is enough where like the Warriors don't make it up elsewhere.
Yeah. So I put them at that's where the difference is that like, I think the gap can be made up with Draymond.
But I also would put Jalen Brunson well above Jordan Poole and Klay Thompson. Like maybe the biggest reason that I'm lower on the Warriors than most people is because I don't think Klay Thompson is a good player right now.
Yes,
I just don't.
But he can show up in one game.
He can, right? Like it's there, but it was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Like he's coming off the good game 6, and I think that adds to the fact that he's being overvalued because like, oh look, Klay Thompson has it now. He finally figured it out. Thompson's been playing for like 4 months. Like he didn't just come back from injury, and he's had a lot of bad games over the last several months. And also, like, if he's the guy who's going to be tasked with guarding Luka for chunks of the game, what's that going to do to his fatigue and energy levels on offense? Like, I just don't see Klay having a good series if they're going to, and that's nothing like in terms of him actually guarding Doncic, which I think is basically impossible for him too. So yeah, maybe it's more about Klay, right? Like we might not disagree by that much as far as the top players, but I just don't think Klay is that much of I think he's kind of a liability for the Warriors at this point in his career.
So your picks, both of you, Matt, ultimately, which way are you going to go with this series? So we have it on the record.
Yeah. So this one's tough because it's the same deal as the Celtics, where the Warriors have the rest advantage over Dallas, just like Miami has it over Boston. Mm-hmm. And so for that reason, I'm not that excited about game 1. I do think taking the series line is worth it now, but I think the best opportunity comes from essentially just waiting till after game 1 and then taking the series line before game 2. And if Dallas wins game 1, I'll just take the series line at a lower number. Like, I think that would be fine. But most likely situation here is that Dallas loses game 1 just because of how much fatigue they have compared to the Warriors. And then you're getting a big number for game 2. So I think +5 is fine. I think the series line is fine. But my strongest take is to wait until after game 1 and then just bet the series line.
Okay. I'm going to take the Celtics and the Warriors both in 6. That's my feeling on these right now. What do you say, Sharad?
I think we're gonna see.
No, we have a problem. Al Horford is not playing tonight.
Oh, what? Wow.
Well, that explains why the Celtics just went off the board.
Oh,
what happened?
Health protocols. And Smart's out too.
Kidding.
Yo, this is you. You jinxed it. You said there's going to be COVID and you called it.
There's been COVID all over the place for a long time.
I know.
I don't know what to do now. Should we just cry? Like, how do we handle this?
I think we do start with you being at fault.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All your fault.
There's no question about that.
Wow.
I was going to wrap up the show. but I feel like we need to give this a couple of minutes here.
Well, the other problem
check
is
if the
because
check
it's
if the
health
series
protocols, we
market's
don't know
still
how
up.
many games.
It's
How
not.
many games
It's
does
not.
Al Horford miss for this?
Well,
Right.
let's see. Let's the series.
I would
Everything's
imagine
gone.
all the lines are gone.
Yeah.
Right. Like we're not going to be able to.
Series correct score, all that stuff's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Al Horford not playing tonight. That is really difficult. And I mean, when that comes back up,
health and safety protocols is particularly concerning.
and that's why
they're playing every other night. Who knows? This doesn't mean he's missing just one game.
Yep.
Right. And then health and safety protocols, like who knows who gets it next.
Yeah.
So I think
All
we're
right.
going to see the Heat something like -5 or 6 for tonight.
Yep.
And then I don't know where the series line comes back up. Are we staying on until we get a new line? Is that
No? I mean, I don't think we'll do that.
That was the biggest news of the entire time we've been on air. I think breaking right there.
For it to come at 59.
Yeah, right. Oh no.
Well,
you can't tell how much this hurts me, but it's hurting a lot on the inside.
yeah, likewise.
Yeah, we're all holding it together pretty well, but
Yeah.
it's definitely painful.
Nobody's crying yet, so that's uplifting. Well, I have to assume now. So now I'm going to assume that your starters for the Celtics are going to be Derek White, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Grant Williams, Rob Williams.
Yeah, I think that has to be right. Well, let's see if Time Lord can it's going to be a big deal if he can be his normal self for this game.
What do you suppose? Again, we're just projecting here, but you think 5? You think that's what the line is going to be for this one?
Yeah, something like that. 4.5, 5, somewhere.
It was already 2.5.
Right.
Well, Smart was just ruled out 2.
Right.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
that was
gonna
mostly
say 5.
expected. Like I think the Smart getting ruled out might not have even bumped it to 3. It might have stayed at 2.5 just from that. But let's say it was 3 and then Horford's another 2 points. Yeah, something like that.
Right.
And would you take them, or would you take the Heat?
I think 5's correct. If it doesn't move to 5, if it comes back and it's only 3, then I'd have to say the Heat are value there. I think 5.5 is like what it should be. So we'll see if the odds makers agree with me or not. But anything south of 4, I would definitely lean Miami, which is very unfortunate and really sad to say, but we'll see. We should see a new line within a minute or two, I would think.
Yeah.
Well, while we're waiting for that for a couple of moments, one thing that's not going to change, guys, obviously, are salaries on DraftKings. So if you're thinking about showdown and investing however people are going to invest,
Daniel Tice has to be a play that you use tonight.
Yeah,
Right.
we'll see. I guess we're going to need to look at some prices, right? Because Tice was not even in consideration until just now.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He might have played 0 minutes before this update.
So
my guess is the 2 highest owned showdown players are going to be Robert Williams and Derek White. And then so Tice could be the leverage off of Williams. But we'll see. Maybe Tice starts. We don't know how healthy Time Lord is.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if the approach, who knows, but you could cap a guy like Tice or like Grant and load up on the I don't know exactly how it would all fit salary wise without building out a lineup, but you could fit a good chunk of Tatum, Brown, Butler, Bam, Hero. You can, if you go with a super cheap captain, obviously like that. I don't know if that's the move.
I'd be cautious about Grant Williams though, because I don't think he can get really more usage out of this.
Yeah. Well, it's fair.
Just a little
He's
bit.
entirely dependent on people passing him the ball.
Well, and they're not going to just, when I say the Heat are not going to just give him the 3 the way the Bucks did.
Right. But Tatum and Brown are still the primary scorers here.
Correct.
Grant Williams' usage would have gone up if, let's say, Tatum or Brown or, the ball handlers were missing. Horford being out, of course, means more minutes, but that's all it means. It's still roughly the same role when he's out there. And I don't think, can the Celtics go Grant Williams at the 5 for any real,
Yeah, they can. I believe he can match up well against Bam. I don't see why he can't square
maybe
up.
if Time Lord weren't available, but I think they'll try to play each of those 2 centers roughly half the game between Tyson Williams.
I just think if you were able to guard, at least stay in front of, weren't defending to Giannis had a great series. First player with 200, 150, which is crazy. But if he can man up with Giannis, I'm sure he can line up with Bam.
So we do have a line back.
And it is
hasn't refreshed on my screen yet.
4. Wow.
So it's a bit lower than I think it should be. I also think -180 on Miami just as a money line. Do we have a serious linebacker or it's just this? I can
Not yet.
I'm a little surprised that that's all it is.
Like, was it already like starting to be factored in? Because I remember this morning when I looked at it, it was -2.
Well, I think Smart being out, I think was factored.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I think the sportsbook was probably already looking at Smart not playing.
Right. I think that's why the line was moving, was as the day was progressing. I think every minute that passed without getting Smart will play made it more and more likely he wasn't going to play. But this Horford thing, I don't think anyone was ready for that. So to only move it another 1.5 or so for Horford is strange. Because, like, we're going to see some smaller lineups. We're going to see more Daniel Tice, who I know Celtics fans love Daniel Tice. Maybe this is the biggest difference between me and real Celtics fans, is I think Daniel Tice is terrible. And real Celtics fans love him. So maybe that's how you can figure out the difference. But it's going to be more Tice, it's going to be more Pritchard. There's going to be some more smaller lineups. I mean, all of that is worse than Horford. The one thing that the Celtics do have going for them, though, is compared to like what would have happened last round under these circumstances, is Horford is not essential as far as guarding the elite players of the other team. Like the Heat's best playmaker is Jimmy Butler, and their second best is Tyler Hero. And neither of those were players that Horford was going to guard. If it was Giannis that he had, like, not having Horford last round would have been a way bigger problem. So it's still bad. Like, it's still really bad, but fortunately they can still guard Butler and Hero just fine. It's going to be more about, like, they don't have Horford's court spacing. Tice out there is not nearly the threat, and his defense and rebounding, like, you're just going to miss that too, obviously. No matter who you're facing, it's still bad.
JP's asking, is Tice starting? We don't know yet. And we
may not find out for a while, right? Because the game's in 2.5 hours.
Well, whenever Ime Udoka meets with the media, he's pretty forthcoming. He'll give you the starters once he does chat with the media. I'm not sure exactly what time that is happening, but probably
probably like in an hour.
Yeah, maybe even closer to 6:30, but not while we're still on. That much I know.
Yeah. My gut is Tice starts. Just the reliability and having played all of last series, and he may only get 18 minutes as a starter, but I think he probably, just to give them that solid guy who they know has been out there for 7 straight games. I don't know that they want to start Robert Williams right away. So the bold take I'll make is that Tice starts, but Robert Williams winds up playing more minutes than him.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, Tice is destined to get into foul trouble, so
he doesn't have to guard a high offensive threat, though. Like,
he doesn't have to guard anyone to get fouls.
That's true. Yeah, we get like 4 moving screens in the first half, and then,
exactly.
That is true.
All right. Well, there are no Madden Sims tonight, but what you do have coming up at 7:00 across these DraftKings channels is a very special new thing that we're going to try out here. It's the Baseball is Dead live stream with Jared Carabas, and WEEI's Lou Merlone is going to be alongside for that. Starts at 7:00. Where they're basically going to watch like 10 baseball games and the Celtics all at once, and just react accordingly. It should be a lot of fun. I know Carabas is excited about it, and any fans of his various podcasts are sure to enjoy it as well. So make sure you do. And Merlone is not a guy that lacks opinions either, so you'll get a lot of good stuff in that show. Make sure you check it out. Eamon is our producer. We've got Daniel, our technical director, and I'd say we're at a loss for words, but we're definitely confounded. That is for sure. Matt Meiselman, Chirag here. I am Adam Kaufman. Again, if you are just joining us, albeit late, no Al Horford, health and safety protocols, no Marcus Smart with the mid-foot sprain. They are both out. The Celtics are missing 2 starters tonight in game 1 against the Heat in Miami of the East Finals. It all begins at 8:45 tonight, and plenty coming up for you on the Sweat tomorrow morning reaction to that game, and on Slate each and every day this week as well. So, fellas, well, I'll let you hunt around the DK Sportsbook and look for value opportunities right now. Maybe you can find some good props out there on the players.
Take the under.
See you later.
Later.